Hearing will come to order. Welcome to the Senate Budget Committee. Before we begin today, I'd like to take just a moment to send our thoughts and prayers to the people of Japan during the crisis that they're confronting. And I'd ask that we observe a moment of silence and respect to those who have been lost and those who are suffering there. Thank you for that. Now we'll proceed with the hearing. In this hearing today, I want to particularly welcome our two very distinguished witnesses, Senator Pete Domenici and Dr. Alice Rivlin. They served as co-chairs of the Bipartisan Policy Center's Debt Reduction Task Force. Our hearing today focuses on the task force's debt reduction proposal, titled Restoring America's Future, which was issued in November. Both of our witnesses are very well known to this committee. Senator Domenici served on the Budget Committee for 34 years, almost unimaginable. Yeah. Was chairman or ranking member for 22 of those years. I served with him during many of those years, and I can tell you Senator Domenici was a leader and somebody that we all had respect for in the way he conducted this committee and the passion that he brought to the subject. Those years of service are committee records, and I venture to say they will not be equaled. So, Pete, welcome back. It's good to have you here. Dr. Rivlin is also a giant in the budget world. She was founding director of the Congressional Budget Office, served as the director of the Office of Management and Budget in the Clinton administration, held the position of vice chair of the Federal Reserve. In addition to co-chairing the Bipartisan Policy Center's Debt Reduction Task Force, Dr. Rivlin also served with me as a member of the President's Fiscal Commission, so she did double duty, and I can attest personally to the tremendous contribution she made to that effort. So, Dr. Rivlin, welcome back. She's been before this panel many times. I believe our nation is in peril. We are hurtling towards a fiscal cliff. We are borrowing about 40 cents of every dollar that we spend. Deficits have exceeded $1 trillion for 3 years in a row. That's $1 trillion, not a million, not a billion, $1 trillion. People tell me people have a hard time distinguishing million, billion, trillion. Well, $1 trillion is 1,000 billion dollars. That is a staggering amount of money. So here we are. And the long-term outlook is even worse. We are clearly on an unsustainable course. Before I go further, and I want to also recognize Bill Hoagland, the former staff director of this committee. Bill also served on the debt reduction effort that was led by Pete Domenici and Alice Rivlin. Bill, deeply respected by every member on this committee during the time he served as staff director, both Republicans and Democrats. We may have differed on specifics. One thing you knew is Bill Hoagland was interested in what was good for the country. Let me go to the slides. And for those who watch budget hearings, I'm repeating some of these things because I think it is so important to repeat them. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has said our national debt is our biggest national security threat. Make no mistake, we are at a critical juncture. Spending is at the highest level of a share of our economy in 60 years. Revenue is at the lowest level as a share of our economy in 60 years. Gross debt as a share of the economy will reach 100% this year, well above the 90% threshold that many economists regard as a danger zone. Two of the nation's leading economists, Carmen Reinhart and Kenneth Rogoff, have just completed a book on this subject, and they concluded, we examined the experience of 44 countries spanning up to 2 centuries of data on central government debt, inflation, and growth. Our main finding is that across both advanced countries and developing and emerging markets, high debt-to-GDP levels, those above 90%, are associated with notably lower growth outcomes. That's why all this matters. When you reach a gross debt of 90%, your future economic prospects are impaired, and impaired in a substantial way. So when people ask, well, what does it matter whether you got a debt of 90 or 100 or 120% of your gross domestic product, what matters is what that means for the future economic strength of the nation. What that means is our future economic opportunity is going to be reduced. Fewer job opportunities, fewer opportunities for all the American people, and a fundamental threat to the national security of the nation. That's why this matters. So these debt figures are not just numbers on a page. They are things that affect the lives of real people. And we are now dangerously indebted to foreign nations. Here are the top 10 foreign holders of U.S. debt. We now owe China more than $1 trillion. I believe the only way we're going to solve the nation's long-term fiscal imbalances is by enacting a comprehensive debt reduction plan. Frankly, we don't have time to do this one piece of the puzzle at a time. We've got to take this on comprehensively and put in place a plan that gets real results, dramatic changes in our circumstance over the next decade. We need a package of the size and scope of the plans proposed by the President's Fiscal Commission and the plan put forward by the Bipartisan Policy Center. Although the plans differed on some specific policies, both took a balanced approach that included discretionary spending cuts, including defense, entitlement changes, and fundamental tax reform that simplifies the tax code, lowers rates, and raises revenue. This chart shows the trajectory of debt under the various debt reduction plans. Under CBO's alternative fiscal scenario, which roughly corresponds to our current course, debt will rise to 233% of GDP by 2040. That will never happen because our lenders will never permit it to happen. Under Chairman Ryan's roadmap proposal, debt, and this is not gross debt now, this is publicly held debt. Publicly held debt is substantially lower than gross debt. Under Chairman Ryan's roadmap proposal, debt will continue climbing to 99% of GDP by 2040. And again, that's publicly held debt. Publicly held debt is roughly 70% at the end of this year. So you can see under his plan, debt will continue to rise to nearly 100% of GDP by 2040 as measured by publicly held standards. Under the Bipartisan Policy Center plan, debt will fall to 54% of GDP. Again, this is publicly held debt. And under the Commission proposal, debt will fall to roughly 30% of GDP by 2040. Chairman Ryan's roadmap proves the point that revenues, I believe, have to be part of a plan to reduce the deficit and debt. Otherwise, the debt is too high. Under his plan, gross debt would be about 130% of GDP, well above where it is today. The result is the plan increases the debt as a percentage of GDP for the next 30 years, instead of bringing it down like the other two plans. Here's an overview of the Bipartisan Policy Center plan. That is the plan that Senator Domenici and Director Rivland were the principal architects for. It lowers the deficit to 1.2% of GDP in 2015 before increasing slightly to 1.5% by 2020. It stabilizes the debt by 2013 and brings it down to about 60% by 2020 and 54% by 2030. Again, this is publicly held debt. It reforms Social Security, ensuring that it remains sustainable and solvent for at least 75 years. It phases out the health tax exclusion, caps Medicare and Medicaid growth, and creates a partial Medicare voucher. It provides fundamental tax reform that broadens the tax base, reduces rates, and dedicates revenues to reducing debt. It also includes a value-added tax. and it freezes domestic discretionary spending for 4 years and defense spending for 5. This final chart compares the results in 2020 from the Fiscal Commission plan, the Bipartisan Policy Center plan, and the President's budget. It shows that the Fiscal Commission plan and the Bipartisan Policy Center plan result in similar outcomes for deficit, debt, spending, and revenues as a share of the economy. Under an extension of the President's budget, we would see considerably higher deficits and debt and a larger disparity between spending and revenues in 2020. I look forward to more closely examining the specific recommendations in the Bipartisan Policy Center plan in today's hearing. We'll turn now to Senator Sessions for his opening remarks, and then we'll hear from Senator Domenici and Director Rivlin. Again, I want to welcome you both. I'm using your old title, Dr. Rivlin, but you know, that's a high honor to have been director, and I hope you won't mind